We promised at the beginning that we'd be looking at things that work, little examples of good practice. So we've got 4 really short presentations, hopefully with a little bit of chat time as well, on exactly that, what works in terms of virtual support and supervision, how technology can help us in our roles. So I'd like to welcome up to the stage Kim Robertson, Deb Henderson, Greg Telfer and Philip Gregory. You can read about them in the packs. And they're going to have seats here, and then they'll be leaping up to come and make very short presentations about their work and how technology is helping in their experience. So first of all, let's have Kim but I better give you this, Kim, actually, otherwise you'll be completely unable to move things on. Clickerless.
Some people would say I am utterly unable to move things on, Richard, but that's a different subject altogether. Hi, everybody. It's my pleasure to be here. I'm Kim Robertson, Head of Imaging Services Transformation with NHS England and a diagnostic radiographer. What a fabulous venue, the Shaw Theatre. I was thinking, when was I last appearing in a theatre? And I decided it was probably 1992, wrestling with an image intensifier, trying to do a femoral interlocking nail. Let's hope I make a better fist of this than I did of that. It's very much my pleasure to be here today just to talk to you about the virtual support tool Pilots. This is something that I inherited from my colleague and former Head of Imaging Services Transformation, Fiona Thau, who's in the audience today. But part of important work that I hope you see now, the connectivity from the speakers today and that building integration and joining up at national level with NHS England and improvement, with HEE, working in partnership with the Society and College of Radiographers, the RCR, IPEM. I genuinely believe we have a building national picture, and certainly across England, apologies to Scottish, Irish and Welsh colleagues, but certainly speaking on behalf of the English component, I think we really have something building. And just before I begin, I've bumped into a few former colleagues here today, one of whom said, "Oh, what are you doing now, Kim?" I said, "Well, I'm working with NHS England." "Oh, that's all pie in the sky." I wouldn't name a name or anything like that. So I take that personally, not in a bad way. I think what we're trying to do is not make it pie in the sky, but actually land some of it in your day-to-day work and supporting how services can develop. And if I didn't believe in that, I genuinely wouldn't be here. So I hope you're starting to feel a sense that there's investment and there are initiatives that have been long in the pipeline starting to emerge. And now I'll talk about virtual support tool pilots. So, what on earth does that mean? Well, we came up with a phrase because we have to be vendor neutral. And this is our vendor neutral phrase, virtual support tools. And this is technology that enables a different way of working. Part of the remit at NHS England and improvement is to kind of do a bit of horizon scanning. And as mentioned before, my previous colleague and the team now do that horizon scanning. And we heard quite some time ago about the possibility of this type of technology enabling something in terms of workforce, training and education. So we jumped in and we got some funding. And the funding is there to pilot the technology. So you will see that we had funding at quite a high level. We've not deployed all of it in virtual support tool pilots. That money's been deployed elsewhere, but quite a significant investment to pump prime and understand what the opportunity is. So the technological, if anybody technically can help me, it'd be lovely if I could see it on here in full screen. The technological development is something that might split the room. So it's about thinking about how are we deploying that technology? What does it enable? It enables people to operate in the control room and in the environment to support staff development, training, patient throughput. So the context, you've heard the context throughout this morning, it's the workforce gap. It's moving to larger footprints, CDCs, working in a network and system level way. And this is one of the enabling technologies that we would like to explore, but how is that leveraged in that environment? I think it also has a key role in clinical placement for training, which we know is really challenged and compressed. So a bit of a background. I've covered some of this already, but essentially there are a couple of vendors, or more than two now, I think, who have some technology that allows us to be much more connected into control rooms for CT and MRI, but doing that from a hub position. There'll be different models of how that can actually operate, but that, in essence, is a technology that allows people to view images when they're acquired and to provide advice, guidance, supervision, insight. I also think it's got a big role in undergraduate and postgraduate training outside of the clinical environment. What are the potential staff benefits, patient benefits? Well, I think it's about supporting clinically for radiographers. I think it's about building confidence. It's about connecting in with HEIs, connecting in across a much wider footprint than we're able to do. It's about taking the variation out of our protocoling, which is huge and wide and often a subject that creates a lot of passionate discussion. I think also for patients, hopefully it reduces time, and that reducing time is in part linked to the protocols, but is also there's not delays whilst there's discussion about the scan needing to take place that's delayed. So what's the purpose? So our aim was to initiate the projects, the pilots, and that was to explore what the leverage of the technology could be. So we did it through a normal process of governance, a steering group, discussion, setting principles, a process for bidding, evaluation of bidding, award of funding, and then the evaluation and the case studies. National principles, or the things, the dimensions that we wanted people to explore, are listed here. So you've heard me list the vast majority of these already, but we felt it was important that we set something out nationally. And then moving into the local dimensions. So these are a subset, generally speaking. The ones that I'm particularly interested in, where does it work with patient pathways? How does it work with undergraduate training? What are the issues and barriers to uptake? What are the questions we can help to support and resolve? So configurations, and I'm aware I'm having to trot through this quite quickly on the time front. Pilots can be of different size, small, medium, large. Small might involve a number of modalities across a trust and a couple of sites within a trust. Then that scale starts to build, where you may have multiple trusts within an imaging network with multiple sites. So the pilots that we have running, and there are 10, have different levels of scale, and that allows us again to get a feel for what are the differences and the similarities and the power of these pilots. These are the pilot sites, and you will hear from people who are far more informed on the detail of actually getting this up and running and moving. But these are the pilot sites that we're working with, and many in very early stages. Something about timelines, because we have to have timelines. The ultimate aim is to get the case studies and to get the input, and that is around what works well, what needed more support, what barriers did people have to overcome. Those might be cultural, they might be technical. I think at the moment most of them are technical. But it will allow us to understand how is it leveraging and what are the benefits of using this technology, so people can make an assessment of onward investment. And that's me assuming that there is some positive power of the capability of the technology. And that is all from me. Thank you very much for listening. And I'll hand over to my colleagues who will tell you much more the nuts and bolts of what it really means for them. Thank you.
So now we've got Deb and Greg from one of those pilots in Northumbria. So over to over to you.
My name's Deb Henderson, and I'm the Trust Lead Radiographer at Northumbria Healthcare, and this is Greg, he's the CT lead. We're going to talk about why we decided to be involved in the pilot and why we chose the product we did. So during this presentation, we just want to go around the decision making around the plan, the outline of the challenges that we face, expression of interest, the progress to date, or not, as the case may be, and further plans. So a bit of background, Northumbria is the biggest geographical trust in the country. It reaches from the southwest, we have Hexham Hospital all the way up to the borders at Berwick. We have 8 radiology departments, 4 of which have CT scanners. So at present we've got 7 CT scanners, all which are Siemens. In the middle of the trust we have the Northumbria Specialist Emergency Care Hospital. So what Sam was talking about before, since 2015, all emergencies in Northumbria go to one hospital. So that has made it easier for us that the base sites all deal with all the outpatient lists. So we've already separated that work. So we have North Tyneside General Hospital. That has 2 scanners now. We've just recently installed the first dual force energy scanner there, and that was with some CDC money. We have Wandsbek General Hospital that also has 2 scanners, and the smallest of the sites is Hexham with 1 scanner. So our challenge obviously is the distance in the trust. We have a lot of patients that travel all the way from Cumbria anyway to come into our trust. So sometimes for a specialist list, they may travel all the way across to Wandsbek, so they have 2 or 3 hours journey for a very quick CT scan. So skill mix is also a big issue for us. We do work a bit differently to other trusts in the fact that our CT staff are rotational rather than just being dedicated, which has its good points and bad points. But some of that is that we don't always have the staff on the right site for a specialist list. So, for example, that might mean Greg has to travel from Wandsbek to Hexham for a very short list to support the staff there. I think like everybody else, we do have a shortage of radiologists. This means that most of our CT lists, although they're supervised indirectly by a radiologist, they're often the consultant of session, so they will be doing other things. So they're hard to get to, can be frustrating, hold up lists, trying to get hold of them. We regularly, all the scanners like run till 8 o'clock at night, and out of hours, we've only got the support of the consultant and session at the emergency hospital. As you can imagine, they're very busy with the constant emergency scans, CT and MRI coming in. So we do try and keep the amount of calls to them down, but that is challenging. Training across such a big trust is very difficult, and Greg's new in role, and that's something that's his problem now. And
Yep.
And the new scanner is our first dual energy scanner, so it's going to be difficult to get everybody up to speed, which is why we feel that this was really important to us. So for us, the opportunity, we got the invitation for the expression of interest like everybody else. It was fairly easy to persuade the department to back us submitting one. I think as a trust, they do push us to look at new innovation that will help with quality and efficiency. So that was the easy part. All our scanners are Siemens, so the Siemens product was obviously the best fit for us. Originally, our quote, because the expression of interest went in last year, we didn't have the dual energy scanner at that point, and the time scales for this pilot were originally a lot earlier than has actually come about. So Originally it was for the 6 scanners, but because the project all got delayed a bit and pushed on, they kindly let us add the dual energy scanner to the expression of interest, which we feel will be very beneficial for us. The expression of interest was prepared with the costs and the outcomes that we're going to measure. I guess one big problem is that the workforce money in the funding was capital workforce, so it allows for the training and the setup, but after that, you know, you do have to provide the workforce to run the hubs. So that has been challenging, and that's why we're going to have a phased implementation. And at this point, I'm going to hand over to Greg.
Cheers. Hello. So, like Debbie said, we've only got 2 radiologists that our radiographers can contact at all times. And those radiologists have got a huge burden. They're scanning and just looking at all the reports that they're getting. And they're also having to get all of the information that they're getting from all the wards and the A&E departments, let alone radiographers knocking on the door, pestering them all the time. So we're going to try and hope if we can pull away a little bit off that COS and give that to the radiographer who's going to be sitting in the cockpit. We've got to be careful that we're not going to be replacing the COS and the consultant. They're still always going to be there. But hopefully with someone who's like an expert in acquisition, we can alleviate some of that pressure from them. It's also going to help our radiographers in their confidence a little bit. There's a lot of anxiety of having to find a radiologist, ring one, run around for one. And if they know that they've got somebody that they can contact easily, there's a chat function. It's like MSN from years ago. It's just dead quick. And then we can share the screen and we can take over what they're doing and give them the support that they can need. And it's going to be really easy for us to start training radiographers and undergrads. So we have specialist lists on different sites. Rather than pulling people over for a whole morning, we can just use one of the cockpits. We're going to have 6 or 7 people sitting in there rather than in a control room where there's not much room. And it means they're watching a totally uninterrupted list. They're not influencing what's actually happening, so they can see how radiographers problem solve together and work dynamically together. And it's going to help increase standardization. Like Debbie said, I might have to drive across to Hexham at the moment to change a protocol there. That might take 2 minutes. And that means that we can just do it all at once and it happens at the same time. And obviously that's going to help reduce travelling across the trust just for scanning lists as well. We're going to have 2 hubs in the base sites, so we're not going to have one at the specialist emergency hospital, but there's always going to be people in the air hub. We're going to start slowly, so we're going to start 2 days a week, and they're going to be in our specialist lists where we expect and anticipate the most calls. So that's going to be on our colon lists and our cardiac lists primarily. And then in the second phase, the 3 days a week, that's when we might start seeing how well the training goes. And then obviously we're going to end up 5 days a week and in 6 months. And while the radiographers are going to be sitting in a cockpit, we want to make sure that they're going to be doing something that they can just drop and pay attention to the radiographer who needs them. It's no use if they're in X-ray and they're kind of in the cockpit, but they're not really, and they've got to finish an X-ray first. We want to make sure that they can be sitting vetting or doing something that they can help the radiographers with. So to measure whether this is successful, we're going to talk to the radiologists, see if they've had a reduction in calls. We still need to find a baseline, so we're going to have to get them to tally it up. We know that some radiologists are more approachable than others, so there might be a bit of a disparity between them. It's going to be easy to measure the reduction in journeys, and some of the training sessions that we're going to have to deliver in the cockpit, we're going to see, it's going to be easy to measure how many we're doing, but we need to make sure that the people that we're teaching are going to be receptive to them and that we don't have connection issues. I think everyone's had Teams meetings this year and someone's been on mute for 20 minutes and no one's managed to tell them. So we need to make sure that that type of thing isn't hindering us. An issue, so I'm obviously new in post and very naively thought that everyone that we told about this, that we needed help with and sign off IT, that they'd give us like a thumbs up and high five and say, that sounds awesome, get cracking. That has not been the case. So we're having to work with IT a lot, and those guys have a different pace a little bit, and we've had to...
Backwards.
Yeah, we've had to jostle with them. Obviously, they've got acute problems that they need to sort out. And so we've had to sort of approach them with this long-term project and tell them the benefits. And having so many scanners and a couple of cockpits, it's even little things like getting network points live has been a bit of an issue. Information governance has been huge. There's literally cameras in the scan rooms and in the control rooms as well. So there's patients that are going to be sort of live feed films. So I've had to have discussions about what patients are going to be told as well. And it's interesting because all the information that the radiographer is going to be able to see from the cockpit, they're going to be able to see anyway through Chris, his RIS packs as well. But we have found that there has been some difficulty in explaining the difference and how it is just a live feed. We've found it a little bit difficult to get the cameras that we were recommended, but we have got them and they're in, and so we're quite happy with that. And we're going to have to get radiographers used to accessing the cockpit and getting used to slowly implying that they don't have to rely on the consultant as much. Radiographers always chase after other radiographers that they're happy with asking for help anyway, so we just need to sort of formalise that process and streamline it a little bit rather than having to grab people from different areas. Obviously, we're going to have to staff the hub, which I think everyone's obviously struggling a little bit, so we're going to have to make sure that we can staff it properly. And a small issue that we didn't anticipate is that as soon as the cameras started going into the hubs, there was absolute panic from the radiographers because they thought it was Big Brother watching them.
We were spying on them.
And it was like ultra paranoia immediately. So we had to layer that was helpful. And you do have to put in a password and they will know when we're watching them because they'll have to let us watch them, so it should be all right. And yeah, that's us.
So, yeah, so we got to the point. So we were expecting to be up and running by now. We're a little bit delayed. We're hoping to be up and running by the end of the month. I've been told this morning that we're just trying to get through the firewall. That old story. I thought we'd gone past that stage. And then obviously we need to collect the data and submit it because the whole point of this pilot is proving this is useful. So the evaluation, so we'll do an internal evaluation. It is already decided in the trust that if it's useful, we will continue. And I can't see any reason why we wouldn't. And it would be good to perhaps extend it out to the region. We do a lot of work with our neighbouring trust for specialist things. And, you know, you do hear sometimes, well, they don't do it properly over there. So it might give us the opportunity that they can show us what we're doing wrong. That's it.
That's us.
Thank you very much. Well done for getting involved in the pilot. So now we're going to hear also from Philip Gregory from Imperial, involved in piloting the alternative technology. So over to you, Philip.
Thank you. Hopefully my slides will appear in a minute. I was actually thinking about the last time I had to present in front of such a large group face-to-face, and it was actually an unnamed university in front of 150 second-year undergraduate students in a room with a capacity for 100, no air conditioning, broken windows. So this is already a better experience, both in terms of temperature and smell. So it's very good.
Have you got the clicker there?
Oh, I have. That would help. There we are. Okay, yes. So my name's Phil. So I'm a practice educator at Imperial College Healthcare NHS Trust here in London. I'm just going to go through how we're planning to use the ROC, which is the Philips virtual support technology offering. The reason we've gone with this product is because it's vendor neutral. So across our trust, we've got footprint with GE, Philips, and with Siemens equipment. We've also got a service agreement with GE, so we really only have this avenue to go down. So I'm just going to go through a little bit of a background around our trust and some of the challenges that we throw up, which I think perhaps are in contrast to some of the issues you guys have had, and how we think this can address that. In terms of our trust, so we're a huge trust, one of the biggest in the country, so we have a very large imaging footprint across 3 of the 4 main trust sites. Our pilot is based on 2 of those sites, so one being Hammersmith, which is our specialist site, so no acute work, but it's our cardiac site, and St Mary's, which is our major trauma site. So we have all the specialties housed in one place, so we need to be able to deliver cardiac imaging there as well. So our pilot is focused on those 2 sites. In MR alone, our cardiac service, which is predominantly at Hammersmith, delivers 4,500 patients from a variety of referrers. It's staffed in MR by permanent MR staff, Our CT service across the two sites is staffed largely by rotational staff. So there's a bit of a contrast in their skills and experience. And the other thing to bear in mind, which I think is I'm probably quite alone in the room here, is that in our trust we've actually got lots of radiologists. So we're actually creating more posts for more radiologists. We don't have vacancies. So while some of you will think that that's a luxury, actually, in some ways, it's actually having a detrimental impact on our workforce, which is where we think this can be useful. What are our other challenges? So simple geography. So thinking about Hammersmith, it's an incredibly old building. It's a listed building. And as time has gone on, little bits of different services have been bolted on to this very old building. So in MR, for example, we've ended up with one MR scanner in our main imaging department, and then our two, well, they are relocatable, but they've been there for 7 years now. But we've got two relocatable MR units, which are a 5-minute walk down the corridor based in a car park. And it's conceivable you could have a cardiac list running on all 3 of those scanners at the same time. So that's clearly an issue in terms of support for our staff in delivering those services. And St Mary's, which is also delivering both CT and MR cardiac services, that's 20 minutes away. And again, it splits our radiologists in particular in supervising the lists. And our teams of radiographers don't rotate around the sites. So we have to train and support different groups of staff on the different sites. So the other big challenge is our use of consultant time. So it is a luxury having so many consultants, both from the radiologist perspective and cardiologist perspective in our department and contributing to our services. But what started off as goodwill gesture, in that we'd have a consultant coming into the scanner and supervising what was going on, teaching our radiographers how to do things, quickly became an expectation, which has now become actually slightly toxic, because there's now an expectation from radiographers that if they come across a problem, rather than conferring amongst themselves, they will turn to a radiologist or a consultant or a trainee, rather than relying on their own expertise, which creates a lot of tension between the two staff groups, if we're honest, and it's just not a very efficient way of using consultant time or radiographer time either. So that's where we think the VST could be really helpful in kind of removing that culture and replacing it with something which is far better and pushes our radiographers to work at the top of their license. This is our plan and how it's going to work. So essentially, we're going to have one hub room, which is based at Hammersmith Hospital, and that's going to be networked to all of our cardiac cross-sectional imaging infrastructure, so 6 scanners eventually. And we're going to use the VST to essentially introduce a train-the-trainer approach. So we will make use of our existing expertise, both from our consultants who are brought into this, our modality lead at Hammersmith, who's been doing cardiac MR since the dawn of time, and also making use of one of our research leads who happens to be based at Hammersmith as well and delivers national cardiac MR programs. So they're all going to participate in training up some of our existing Band 7s. So by training up, they're going to be sitting in the hub. They're going to be observing these radiographers as they do their lists. And they're going to introduce some assessment to begin with, and then we're going to upskill them. So rather than someone being there to hold their hand, they're going to have the opportunity to use VST to communicate, to learn, and to develop their skills. And after a period, we think of around 3 months, because we're not starting from scratch, we're upskilling existing cardiac radiographers. After a period of 3 months, those people that we've trained will then assume control of the hub. And at the same time, in order to kind of free them up, we're also going to look at how we can use our imaging assistants differently for cardiac imaging, in the sense that at the moment, our imaging assistants don't cannulate, which definitely is unique, it would seem, all over the country. So that's certainly an opportunity to upskill them. We're also going to show them how to position the patients, attach the coils, get correct traces, etc., so that our Band 7 radiographer can be in the hub, or just sitting there scanning and communicating with the hub. So we kind of intensify the teaching and the education that they're getting. Once we prove that that's feasible and works, we're then going to flip over into CT. So the consequence of the support we've seen from radiologists in MR is that there was then an expectation from radiographers in CT that the same thing would happen. And we can see the same patterns starting to pop up in our radiographers, an expectation that a consultant is going to come and support them rather than looking at their colleagues. And this kind of hollowing out of radiographer skills, which we need to stop and address. So we think this is the way to go about doing it. And ultimately, this is about the patient, because at the moment we've got disparity over certain consultants' lists being extremely quick, depending on which radiographer is working with them. So they have a lot of faith in some, not much faith in others. And that is detrimental to our patients. Everyone should get the same high-quality experience. So, in terms of where we're up to, I admire your diplomacy. So I think that governance at the Trust has taken a long time. For a variety of reasons, explaining to people what a VST is on multiple occasions was one. I don't think people quite understood what we were attempting to do or how it would work, because it is a pilot. I thought it would be useful just to show you the footprint of this. So unfortunately, our table is stuck on a lorry somewhere in China, I would imagine. But you can see that actually this only involves, and that's one of the great things about this, this really only needs a Trust PC and then a little bit of Philips hardware and infrastructure attached to it, so its footprint is tiny. So this is actually in a refurbished seminar room, which wasn't being used for anything, and we've now created a nice space, which is also big enough for teaching. So it could be somewhere where we could bring students, as we'll go on to come and sit and watch. And that could be undergraduate radiography students. It conceivably could also be medical students, because we also have lots of fellowships in our cardiology teams, and we'd also like the opportunity to come and watch and see what happens, how things work. We have got some challenges and opportunities, I would say, as well. So the fact that we are now busier than we've ever been, it's very unrelenting on our staff, and that can sometimes give people the mentality that I don't want to change anything, I just want to get through my list. But my argument is that the fact that you're under so much pressure and work is becoming more of a chore is absolutely the reason to try and do something different and be involved in something different. We've also seen a bit of attrition, so that perhaps may influence whether we start with CT rather than MR. At Hammersmith in particular, we're lucky in terms of our relationship with cardiology. So we test a number of sequences for Siemens. So the Kelman sequences, which essentially allow you to scan the heart without any breath hold. We're a testing site for those sorts of sequences. And we've also been looking at an AI platform which actually aids the radiographer in deciding which protocol to use. So on the basis of your first acquisition, or your first sequence, it will predict a pathology, and it will suggest your next course of action. So it's another form of supporting the radiographer rather than relying on a consultant. So we think there's partnership there. My other role at the moment, my secondment, is in helping to develop our imaging academy. And we're fortunate in my part of London that we've already recruited some extra MR practice educators as well. So although we have some attrition locally at Imperial, we have now got the benefit of sector-wide MR practice educators, and we think that they definitely have some value in coming to Hammersmith and utilising this for us as well. We've also, we've got some very old scanners in our trust which are gradually being replaced, and certainly at St Mary's, our acute scanner is being ripped out and replaced by a completely different vendor. So we need to rapidly train 40 or 50 staff to use that. And we think the VST is a good way of accelerating that too. And ultimately, we're really excited by this. I think there's lots of things we've suggested to our staff over the years. And actually, this idea has really inspired a lot of interest, more so than probably anything else, actually, from our staff over the last few years. And they're really interested in this approach and getting some proper training and support from experts. And of course, the opportunity to push themselves, which is great. And certainly, we'll be looking at how we can integrate this into our academy offerings with this hub and spoke model in London. So this will definitely play a part in that. Thank you. That's it.